It's pretty amazing to think about, like pushing past the limits of what you know, stretching your skills, trying new things, and kind of seeing a bigger picture of the world. Well, that's what we're going to be looking at today, the cross-country part of private pilot training.
Yeah, absolutely. For anyone who wants to get their pilot's license, that moment when you fly beyond your usual airport, it's huge. It's exciting, but it's also when you really see if those basic skills hold up when things get more complicated.
Yeah, exactly. So what is this cross-country training, really? I mean, it sounds adventurous. From what we've read, it takes pilots out of their comfort zone and away from their usual airfield. And for you, our listener, who wants to learn fast, but also wants to learn well, think of this as your shortcut to understanding this big step in becoming a pilot. We're going to dig into cross-country training and what it means for aspiring pilots like you, using some really informative stuff we found.
So to start us off, let's get a handle on what we're talking about. What exactly makes a flight cross-country for a private pilot, officially?
Okay, let's break that down. According to the FAA, a cross-country flight for private pilot training means you land at an airport at least 50 nautical miles away from where you started. But it's not just about the distance, right? It involves a whole bunch of different navigation skills.
Right. It's not just a longer flight around your local area. Cross-country flying really brings in the navigation stuff. You've got pilotage, which is basically looking at landmarks on the ground to figure out where you are. Then there's dead reckoning, where you calculate your position based on how long you've been flying, your speed, and the direction you're going. And really important, there's the use of radio navigation aids, like VORs, which are these ground-based beacons that send out radio signals to help pilots find their bearings, and of course, GPS and RNAV systems, which use satellites and computers, respectively, for navigation.
So you're not just looking out the window, right? You're using all these methods to figure out exactly where you are and where you're going. And something our sources emphasize as a big deal is that first solo cross-country flight.
What's really interesting is how it builds confidence when you're on your own. Before you get to that solo flight, you'll do some cross-country flights with a certified flight instructor. Those are like guided learning, where you get practical skills with an expert right there with you.
Right. Let's dive into that first flight with an instructor. What does the student pilot have to do during that initial experience?
Well, in those early dual cross-country flights, even though the instructor is there to watch and help, the student pilot is actively involved in almost everything. You start with planning the route carefully, choosing specific points along the way, figuring out exactly how much fuel you need, and figuring out alternate airports in case something comes up.
Wow, that's a lot of planning even before you get in the plane.
It is, and that's just the pre-flight stuff. The student also has to really study the weather briefing. This means figuring out METARs and TAFs to get the current and predicted weather, checking winds aloft to account for drift and figure out ground speed, and carefully going over NOTAMs to see if there are any hazards or changes at airports along the route.
Okay, so knowing the weather inside and out is super important, which in aviation it should be. What about the actual navigation during the flight itself?
That's where those navigation skills we talked about really come in. The student will be using sectional charts, those detailed aeronautical maps, maybe an electronic flight bag, which we'll talk about later, and those radio navigation aids we mentioned earlier. And then there's communicating over the radio, knowing how to contact air traffic control and using the right phrases for different airspaces. Of course, the instructor is there to guide them and keep everything safe.
It sounds like a great way to practice before the student is on their own for a solo cross-country flight. And speaking of that, our sources describe that solo flight as a huge, thrilling achievement. That must be such a big step.
Yeah, it's a major point in their training. For the first time, the student is the only one responsible for following that pre-planned route all the way through. No instructor sitting next to them to give instant feedback or help. They have to make decisions on the fly. Maybe the weather changes unexpectedly, maybe they drift a bit off course, or they have to talk to air traffic control on their own. This isn't just about flying further, it's about a student pilot really getting those lessons for the first time. They're not just following instructions anymore, they're making big decisions based on their own understanding. That creates a powerful sense of capability.
So it's all about putting what they've learned to the test and relying on themselves. It's about using everything they've learned and trusting their own judgment.
Exactly. It's a huge confidence booster and really strengthens those decision-making skills that are so important for any pilot. It's also super important to remember, and our sources are really clear on this, that during these solo cross-country flights, you absolutely can't take any passengers. This means no friends, no family, not even other student pilots, and until you get your pilot certificate, you can't be the pilot in command with another pilot as a passenger.
That makes sense. It's all about making sure the student pilot can handle everything on their own during this crucial learning phase. Now, let's talk about technology. Our sources mentioned some pretty impressive tools for flight planning.
Yeah, it's really interesting how we mix those classic aviation skills with modern technology. We have all these digital resources that have become so valuable for pilots. For online flight planning, iFlight Planner for AOPA is a great example. It's free for AOPA members and gives you access to high-resolution charts, lots of weather data, detailed airport information, and you can even file your flight plans electronically.
Yeah.
Then you have SkyVector, which is a really popular and user-friendly website. It lets pilots easily plan their routes and get all sorts of airport details and sectional charts.
So it's like having a huge information center right there on your computer, accessible anywhere. And then there are those electronic flight bag apps, or EFBs, which sounds super practical for use right there in the cockpit.
Absolutely. ForeFlight Mobile is probably the most well-known EFB. It has a ton of features that help with almost everything about flying. From detailed flight planning and up-to-the-minute weather to advanced stuff like synthetic vision and moving maps that show the plane's exact location as you fly. Garmin Pilot is another one with lots of features. It's particularly good if your aircraft has Garmin avionics because it seamlessly integrates with live weather, advanced navigation tools, and built-in flight plan management.
Wow, it sounds like these digital tools can really make flight planning and navigation in the air much easier and better. But our sources also make a really good point about the importance of traditional methods.
Yeah, and this brings up a big question about finding the right balance between using technology and mastering basic piloting skills. Many experienced flight instructors still, and rightly so, require their students to learn how to plan their routes on paper sectional charts and fill out navigation logs by hand.
Why is it still so important to learn those manual techniques when we have all this cool technology?
The reason is pretty simple. It's all about really understanding those core navigation principles. If the technology fails, or a pilot is in a situation where they can't use their electronic tools, they need to know how to use those basic methods to navigate safely. It builds a deeper understanding of navigation that you might not get just from relying on a GPS. It's about having solid knowledge that doesn't depend completely on technology.
That makes perfect sense. It's like learning basic math before you start using a calculator all the time. It gives you a much stronger foundation. Okay, before you even take off for a cross-country flight, the preparation seems really important. What are the key steps a student pilot needs to take?
You're right, careful pre-flight preparation is super important for a safe and successful cross-country flight. The first step, as we mentioned earlier, is checking the weather carefully. This means looking at METARs to see what the current conditions are at your departure, destination, and any airports along the way. Analyzing TAFs to get detailed forecasts along your route and at your destination. Checking winds aloft to plan your altitude and calculate your fuel burn accurately. And really carefully reviewing all the NOTAMs to be aware of any temporary flight restrictions, airport closures, or any other important operational information.
Okay, so getting a clear picture of the weather is absolutely the top priority. What comes after that in getting ready?
Next is making a detailed flight plan. Whether they use paper charts and a handwritten log or an electronic flight bag, the pilot needs to carefully choose their waypoints, figure out how long each leg of the flight will take, and estimate the total time to their destination. This often includes calculating important speeds and altitudes for different parts of the flight.
Got it. Planning the route and timing. What else is crucial?
After planning the flight, the next big thing is making sure you have enough fuel. It's not just about having enough to get to your destination. You have to carefully calculate how much fuel you'll use for the entire flight, including the required fuel reserve. You also need to figure out where you can refuel along the way in case of delays or diversions.
That's really important. You never want to be low on fuel.
Mm.
And then, of course, there's the plane itself.
Absolutely. The fourth step is doing a thorough pre-flight inspection of the aircraft. This is always important before any flight, but it's especially crucial before a longer cross-country flight to check for any mechanical problems that could affect the safety of the flight. And lastly, you need to review emergency procedures. This means having a plan for diverting to other airports if there's bad weather or a mechanical issue, understand what to do if you lose communication with air traffic control, and mentally going through what you do in an emergency landing situation.
So it's a really systematic and comprehensive process, which makes sense considering what it means to be a pilot. So after all that training and preparation, what are the benefits of finishing the cross-country phase? Sounds like it's more than just being able to fly longer distances.
That's right. Successfully completing cross-country flights helps you build skills that are fundamental to being a good and safe pilot. One big benefit is that it really improves your situational awareness. When you're navigating to new airports, maybe flying through different and complicated airspaces and always keeping an eye on the weather, you learn to manage your workload, anticipate potential problems, and keep a mental picture of everything happening around you.
So it's about being able to stay ahead of the plane and the environment.
Exactly. Another great benefit is that it boosts your confidence. Successfully flying to new places and handling unexpected situations really makes a pilot believe in their ability to deal with challenges in the air. And then there's the development of good decision-making skills. Cross-country flying is full of choices. Evaluating the weather, checking fuel levels, choosing alternate routes if you need to. Learning to make good decisions quickly in real situations like that is so valuable.
It sounds like this cross-country training is about way more than just checking off a requirement. It's a big turning point in a pilot's overall development and skills.
Definitely. Our sources emphasize that it's a key moment where student pilots really have to use all the knowledge they've gained and build those real-world flying skills. Not just the basics of flying the plane, but the art and science of navigation, communicating effectively and professionally, and making sound decisions while you're in the air.
So to sum it all up, we've really gone deep into the cross-country phase of private pilot training. And it's clear that it's so much more than just flying a certain distance. It's about broadening your horizons, both literally and in terms of your skills as a pilot, and building the skills and confidence you need to be a truly safe and competent aviator. This phase pushes you beyond what you're familiar with and prepares you for confident, independent flight.
As you think about everything involved in cross-country training, it's interesting to see how that mix of established techniques and cutting-edge technology isn't unique to aviation. We see it in many fields. Or maybe you're thinking about that feeling of independence and responsibility that comes with going out on your own, whether it's on a solo cross-country flight, taking on a new project, or pursuing anything new. What does expanding your horizons mean to you when it comes to learning new things and gaining new skills?
Those are some really great points to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.